Okay, so, ready to dive into Nietzsche. We're tackling on the genealogy of morality, and let me tell you, this guy, he wasn't afraid to stir things up. Not exactly known for his warm and fuzzy takes on, well, anything, really, but especially morality.
Absolutely. Nietzsche, he really went there.
Hmm.
Instead of just saying, this is good, that's bad, he's like, hold on, let's dig into where these ideas even came from. Why do we believe this stuff anyway?
Right, it's like he's handing us a shovel and saying, let's excavate the foundations of morality, shall we? And what he uncovers is, well, let's just say it's a wild ride. Like, take the whole idea of Christian morality, with its focus on compassion, selflessness, all that. Nietzsche argues that wasn't always the dominant view.
Not at all. In fact,
Yeah.
he sees it as a pretty radical shift from earlier ways of thinking about right and wrong, especially in the ancient world. He calls it a reversal of values.
A reversal. Okay, so unpack that for me.
So picture ancient Greece, right? A society that prized strength, power, nobility. Good and bad weren't so much about some universal ethical code, but more about social standing. This is what Nietzsche calls master morality.
Master morality. Got it.
And it's a stark contrast to what he calls slave morality, which he saw emerging with Christianity.
So instead of the powerful calling the shots on morality, suddenly it's the weak and oppressed who are held up as, like, the moral ideal.
Exactly. Nietzsche argues that this shift was fueled by what he calls resentiment, this kind of simmering resentment among those who lacked power. It's like, unable to challenge the powerful directly, they flipped the script.
And said, actually, we're the virtuous ones. You, with all your power and glory, you're the morally corrupt ones.
Precisely. And to cement this new moral order, Nietzsche says, they introduced these concepts of guilt and bad conscience.
Guilt, right. So not exactly a feel-good emotion, is it?
And here's the thing. Nietzsche didn't see guilt as some innate human thing. He thought it was more like a tool for social control, a way to keep our primal instincts in check.
It makes me think of that image Nietzsche uses, the caged animal turning its aggression inward because it has nowhere else to direct it.
Powerful image, right? It's like we suppress those natural desires for power, for dominance, and they get turned inward, become this guilt, this self-denial.
And that's where the whole ascetic ideal comes in, right? This is where things get really interesting.
It does get interesting because when we think asceticism, we often think of like monks or hermits, people renouncing worldly pleasures for spiritual pursuits.
Right, but Nietzsche saw something else going on there, didn't he?
He did. He saw it as a kind of coping mechanism, a way for the weak or resentful to find meaning in their suffering, embrace poverty, chastity, self-flagellation. Suddenly they're on a higher plane than the healthy and the strong.
It's like saying, sure, you have all the material stuff, but I have spiritual purity. So who's the real winner here?
Exactly. And this is where Nietzsche brings in this concept of the will to power.
Okay, will to power. Let's unpack that a bit.
So for Nietzsche, this wasn't just about dominating others. It's a more fundamental drive in all living things to express their strength, their creativity, their influence on the world.
So think like the ambition of an artist, the drive of an athlete, that kind of thing.
That's it. It's about striving, reaching your full potential. But here's the catch. This will to power, it doesn't always play nice with traditional morality, especially the kind that's all about self-denial or renunciation.
Right. Because if you're constantly holding back, repressing your desires, are you really living a fulfilling life? I think Nietzsche would say, heck no.
Heck no. Exactly. He saw that kind of self-denial as almost a form of sickness, a betrayal of our true nature.
So if I'm following you, Nietzsche's basically saying we need to question everything we think we know about morality. Are these values we hold dear actually serving us, or are they holding us back from our full potential?
You got it. And that's what makes Nietzsche so relevant. Even today, he's not giving us easy answers, but he's forcing us to confront these really tough questions about who we are, where our values come from, and what it means to really live a meaningful life.
And we're just getting started, back again, and ready to dig deeper into Nietzsche. Last we left off, we were talking about guilt and how Nietzsche traces it way back, like to the dawn of humanity, before laws, before courts, even before, well, civilization as we know it.
Right. It's like trying to imagine justice in its rawest form. Not exactly a courtroom drama, more like a primal struggle for balance.
So paint that picture for me. What did justice look like in this, like, prehistoric world?
Okay, so imagine someone wrongs you. You can't just, file a complaint or anything. There's no system for that. So what do? You retaliate. You inflict harm to compensate for the harm done to you.
It's about restoring balance, right? Not necessarily about some moral judgment, but about keeping things in check.
Exactly. And Nietzsche, he argues that This primal urge for retribution, this need to settle the score, it's not something we've just, like, evolved out of. He thinks it's woven into the very fabric of who we are.
So when we feel that pang of guilt, that remorse, it's like a faint echo of our ancestors settling scores in a much more, shall we say, direct way.
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? That something so deeply ingrained in us, this capacity for guilt and self-punishment, might have its roots in this ancient, almost instinctive need to balance the scales.
It's mind-blowing. But of course, Nietzsche doesn't stop there. He introduces this other character into the mix,
Ah,
the ascetic priest.
yes, the ascetic priest, a pivotal figure in Nietzsche's genealogy of morality.
Because they provided an explanation, a framework for understanding all this suffering, right?
Precisely. See, life back then, it wasn't all that different in some ways. People still suffered, they still faced loss and injustice and pain, and these priests, they offered an explanation for why.
And that explanation was, let me guess, it's your fault.
Bingo! You are suffering because you have sinned. You have strayed from the path of righteousness, and this is your punishment.
So suffering, which is just a natural part of life, gets transformed into this moral judgment.
Exactly. And the solution, well, the ascetic priest had that covered too. Embrace suffering. Deny yourself earthly pleasures. Purify yourself through self-inflicted pain. In other words, embrace the ascetic ideal.
So we've come full circle. That primal urge for retribution, that internalized need to balance the scales, it gets channeled, it gets shaped into a system of morality that actually values suffering and self-denial.
It's brilliant, isn't it? The way Nietzsche connects those dots.
Yeah.
He shows how something that might have started as a way to maintain order in a very different world could be molded into something that seems, well, almost the opposite of life-affirming.
So we're left with this question. If we accept Nietzsche's critique, if we see this ascetic ideal as potentially harmful, then what? What do we put in its place? How do we even begin to build a new system of values?
The million-dollar question. And Nietzsche, he doesn't exactly give us a step-by-step guide. He's more about making us question, making us confront the abyss that opens up when we start to dismantle these old ways of thinking.
So no easy answers then.
Not from Nietzsche. But he does offer some clues, some hints about how we might navigate this new terrain. And one of the keys, he suggests, lies in understanding and harnessing that force we touched on earlier, the will to power.
Ah, yes. The will to power. It's a concept that can be easily misunderstood, right? It's not just about, like, bossing people around.
No, it's much deeper than that.
Yeah.
For Nietzsche, the will to power is this fundamental creative force that exists in all living things. It's the drive to grow, to expand, to make our mark on the world.
It's the ambition of the artist, the drive of the athlete, the entrepreneur's vision.
Exactly. It's about striving, about reaching your full potential, however you define that. And this is where Nietzsche's critique of the ascetic ideal comes back into play, because he argues that when we deny our desires, when we try to suppress this will to power, we're essentially denying a fundamental part of what it means to be human.
It's like we're cutting ourselves off from the source of our own creativity, our own vitality.
Precisely. And this is where Nietzsche's philosophy takes this turn toward a more, I'd say, life-affirming perspective.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about guilt and punishment anymore. It's about embracing this powerful force within us.
This will to power.
Yes. But here's the catch. It's not inherently good or bad. It's a force, like any other, that needs to be understood, it needs to be channeled, it needs to be directed.
And that's where things get really interesting, right? Because we're left grappling with this question of how do we cultivate a will to power that doesn't become destructive? How do we prevent it from becoming a will to power over others?
Big questions, and questions that we'll dive into right after this.
Okay, so we're back, and I've been thinking about how with Nietzsche, you can't just put him in a box. We talk about power, we talk about morality, but then there's this whole other side to him, Nietzsche on art.
And it's not like it's a separate thing, right? It all connects. Nietzsche, he saw those connections between these different aspects of what it means to be human.
It's like you're saying art isn't just something pretty to look at, it's got this deeper purpose.
Exactly. For Nietzsche, art was a way to really grapple with the big questions, the ones we often shy away from: life, death, meaning, all of that.
And he didn't shy away from those darker, tougher aspects of life either, did he? Even with art. Which is interesting because we've been talking about this ascetic ideal, which seems kind of opposed to this very life-affirming philosophy.
Right, and it does seem like a bit of a paradox, doesn't it? But Nietzsche, he was full of surprises. He recognized that even this impulse toward self-denial, toward renunciation, it could also find expression in art that's both beautiful and, well, kind of unsettling.
It's like those Gothic cathedrals we talked about. They have this austerity, this starkness that can be really powerful.
Exactly. And Nietzsche saw that. He saw that there's a kind of beauty in confronting the darkness, in acknowledging the suffering that's just a part of life.
It's not about glorifying suffering, right? It's about finding a way to create something beautiful and meaningful even in the face of it.
Precisely. And Nietzsche believed that great art could teach us to do that, to embrace the whole spectrum of human experience without shying away from the tough stuff.
And this is where his whole Apollonian and Dionisian thing comes in, right? These two forces, these two impulses that are always kind of battling it out.
That's right. Remember, he took those terms from Greek mythology, the god of order and reason, Apollo and Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, two very different energies.
So you've got the Apollonian order, control, clarity, and then the Dionysian chaos, instinct, ecstasy.
And Nietzsche's point is that both of these forces are essential to great art. It's in the tension between them, the interplay between order and chaos, that something truly powerful can emerge.
It's like a piece of music can be technically brilliant, perfectly structured, but also have this raw emotional power that just hits you in the gut.
That's a great example. And that's what Nietzsche was getting at. He wanted us to experience art on that deeper level, to let it move us, to let it challenge us, to let it break us open a little bit.
Instead of just trying to analyze it or dissect it, right?
Exactly. Let go of the need for control, the need to understand everything, and just allow yourself to feel it.
It's like he's saying, don't just think about art, experience it.
Exactly. And to do that, we need to be open to everything it has to offer, even the parts that make us uncomfortable. Because the kind of art that really matters, the kind that can change us, it doesn't shy away from the difficult stuff.
It's like art can be a space where we confront those big questions, ones about life, death, meaning, all of it.
It's a space where we can wrestle with those things, explore them, maybe even find some kind of beauty or understanding in them. And in doing so, we might just find a way to live more fully, more honestly, more in tune with what it really means to be human.
Wow. Well, I think we've all got some thinking to do. This has been an incredible journey into the mind of Nietzsche.
It really has.
And on that note, we'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.